Today, the subcommittee is meeting to consider three bills. H.R. 929, the Puyallup Tribe of Indians Land into Trust Confirmation Act would place 17 acres of land in Pierce County, Washington into trust for the tribe. The land is currently owned in fee simple, and the tribe intends to use the land for economic development purposes to benefit the tribe and local area. Their plans include developing a deepwater port in the Port of Tacoma, a restaurant which would integrate traditional tribal foods, and a seaplane terminal. The land that would be placed into trust has evidence of environmental contamination, as most industrially developed land in the Tacoma area has. Because of that likely contamination, the Bureau of Indian Affairs would require a full remediation of the land before taking it into trust through their administrative fee to trust process. However, a full remediation would be prohibitively expensive to the tribe and should not be necessary for the tribe to move forward in their plans for the acreage. The bill also provides that the United States shall not be liable for any environmental contamination that has occurred on the land and prohibits gaming pursuant to the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act from occurring. Second, we have H.R. 2882, the Udall Foundation Reauthorization Act of 2023. This bill would reauthorize the Morris K. Udall and Stuart L. Udall Foundation and would extend 3 authorizations of appropriations for the Udall Foundation at their current levels, as subject to appropriations through fiscal year 2028. The Udall Foundation was first established in 1992 and was most recently reauthorized in 2019. The Udall Foundation has 4 major programs: the Education Trust Fund, the Native Nations Institute for Leadership, Management, and Policy, the Udall Center for Studies in Public Policy, and the John S. McCain III National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution. The Education Trust Fund provides funding for Native American student internships, including the Native American Congressional Internship Program, as well as fellowships for Native American graduate students pursuing advanced degrees in healthcare. The other institute and centers focus on research, science policy connections, leadership resources, and conflict resolution related to natural resource management, public lands, and tribal governments. Our final bill, H.R. 3579, the Tribal Trust Land Homeownership Act of 2023. This bill would require the BIA to process and complete all mortgage packages on Indian land in a timely manner. This bill would only impact land held in trust because additional approvals from the BIA are generally needed when someone seeks a mortgage on trust lands. Unlike leasehold and rights-of-way mortgages, there are currently no statutory timeframes for the review and approval of trust land mortgages. This bill would put timeframes in place and align them with private industry standards. Current industry practices process mortgage packages within a month, and it is important that the BIA moves to replicate this. The BIA published their mortgage handbook outlining non-binding timelines for each step in the mortgage process. However, we've heard that these timelines are arbitrary and often exceed the guidelines. H.R. 3579 will ensure there are statutory timeframes in place, and that will help promote opportunities for home ownership on trust lands and in tribal communities. I want to thank all of the witnesses for appearing before the committee, and I look forward to a robust discussion on these important topics. My first question is for Ms. Heather Dawn Thompson. Beginning with H.R. 929, my understanding is that the BIA's fee to trust acquisition process prohibits the agency from acquiring land into trust that is environmentally contaminated without first having full remediation. If Congress were not to pass H.R. 929, what steps would the tribe need to take to make the land eligible to be taken into trust through BIA's regulatory process?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. If you were not to pass, the tribe would be required to mediate, and thus far the estimates go as high as $10 million.
Okay.
So it's quite cost prohibitive. We run into this situation very frequently, as you can imagine, with tribes that do want to put land into trust because of that regulatory requirement. And we certainly welcome a TA request for a conversation for a path forward beyond the Puyallup tribe.
Well, I sure like the idea of the economic development that you have described, Mr. Rideout, and the projects that you are proposing, the idea of another deepwater port and the other things, the restaurants, all sound very exciting. I think it's fantastic. I'm a strong advocate for additional economic opportunities for our tribal members and appreciate this particular bill for doing that. Again, Ms. Thompson, leading up to, turning to HR 3579, your testimony mentions that the BIA's mortgage handbook lays out clear timelines for the mortgage review process and that this bill would essentially codify the current timelines. Does BIA meet all of those timelines for all mortgage applications at this time?
Madam Chair, we do not meet all of the timelines at this time, but we have dramatically improved them, and we certainly welcome the challenge to have it codified.
Do you have any information you can share with the committee about how BIA has or hasn't met the handbook timelines? What are some of the problems?
There's probably 4 general challenges that we meet, Madam Chairwoman. The first one is staffing, which is an appropriation, not an authorization issue, but we estimate that we need approximately 80 FTEs in order to provide the customer service that we would really like to. We are also trying to improve our technology. We are doing that without the appropriations, but we're doing it nonetheless and providing some portals. Then there's one that's rather systemic, which is challenging, which you're probably aware of in Wyoming, which is the fractionization of land.
Yes.
And so unfortunately, it's just not as efficient as in the private sector. And then finally, probably the last one is that sometimes we get from lenders the lease and the mortgage at the same time. And it just takes a moment to do the lease first and then get caught up with the mortgage.
Well, we definitely encourage the agency to be able to process these in a timely manner. I think that Ms. Vogel made some very good points in her testimony, and we want to encourage the home ownership. It provides certainty, stability, and all of those things. So thank you for your efforts in that regard. Mr. Rose, in December 2012, the DOI's Office of the Inspector General found that the foundation was not meeting certain federal requirements in relation to monitoring and assessing spending and creating safeguards against fraud and mistakes. Follow-up audits completed by the Governmental Accountability Office found various deficiencies across the foundation's accountability procedures. How did the foundation respond to these findings?
The foundation, I think, responded in 2 respects. Number one, the foundation engaged in a concerted effort to overhaul its internal procedures and policies in order to respond to the GAO findings. Number two, the foundation embraced the audits that were performed by the Department of the Interior Inspector General, and we implemented the findings and corrected some of the recommendations that the IG from Interior made along the way. And in fact, in the last reauthorization, 2019, there was an audit requirement, and the IG from the Interior came out and during a 1.5 to 2 year period issued a report with no material weaknesses and no major findings. There were 11 recommendations, primarily process documentation, which we responded to, and the Interior IG determined that we satisfactorily resolved and implemented the recommendations.
We appreciate the efforts of the foundation to meet the audit concerns and to address those, and hope that you can continue to stay in compliance as you need to. I do want to say one thing about the conflict resolution as a long-term trial attorney and someone who tends to represent landowners, resource producers, and things like that. I do think that's extremely important for an organization that is dedicated to dispute resolution, that you understand the local issues that are involved with many of these things. And oftentimes when outside environmental groups come in and attempt to dictate the outcome on some of these, I think it is extremely important that the local tribal issues, the local landowner issues, the local water issues are kind of front and center in the efforts to resolve those matters, because they are critical to the success of those areas in the long term. And in the long term, they're critical to our ability to protect our environment as well. So I would follow up with Mr. LaMalfa on that. Ms. Vogel, I just have a couple of questions for you. Again, I appreciate your testimony. I also think that home ownership is so critically important. And it's always frustrating to me when I read about or learn about there being barriers to people being able to obtain the housing that they need. And I get especially frustrated when those barriers are from the government. And I understand the challenges there and encourage you to continue to work with folks like Ms. Vogel to resolve them. In your testimony, you mentioned long delays and inconsistencies with the BIA mortgage process that have been experienced by tribal members. Can you further elaborate on what those experiences have been like for tribal members?
Well, as we know, thank you for the question, Madam Chair. As we know, the mortgage process is time sensitive. And when you start the process, your financial records may only be good for, 3 months, and then you have to renew everything. That is where the frustration comes in, is having to renew the time-sensitive documents that your lender may require. But also, I am encouraged by something, and it happened with our own agency, BIA agency staff, is as more tribal members become homeowners and go through that process, they have an appreciation for it and they understand it, and then they know the importance of getting it done. So a lot of work has to be done to make, homeownership possible, opportunities possible, and as more and more professional staff that before didn't own their home and step into that, then they become our supporters. So in those areas where you have had that happening, you see better results.
Success begets success.
Yes.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. I think that's fantastic to know that just the personal experience is making a difference there where people can help the next generation into home ownership. And can you give us an average time that it takes for a tribal member to obtain a mortgage?
As I stated, it really varies from region to region, and where you have partnerships at the local level that are working to do homebuyer readiness and getting families ready and help them understand the mortgage process, so that they know what to expect on what their responsibilities are. They understand what the lender is expecting. So as they move through that process, they understand the time frame, and it just works when you have that active engagement by partners. And so with the South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, our work is all around that, making sure that lenders understand the processes on tribal lands, identifying more lenders to enter in so that you have better competition. And when you have federal state agencies working alongside tribal agencies, then we all are able to help each other and advocate for policy change or what other changes are needed. So there's progress being made, and there's still work that has to be done, but it's worth the effort.
Well, I appreciate that. And very quickly, Councilman Rideout, could you please give us a timeline in terms of your restaurant? Because I'm kind of a foodie and I'd like to come and visit it.
Yeah, we're looking at the first quarter of next year.
Fabulous.
Is the first Broy Yamaguchi's, yes.
All right.
Along with the seaplane too, so if you want to take a ride and.
I'll take a seaplane before dinner, and then I'll come and eat at the
But
restaurant.
I'll leave you with this, and it's really critical to our vice chair. When it comes to our youth, our vocational training is the most imperative thing that we could possibly do because our future is in our youth. And so as we develop this and encourage them to, take this opportunity in a very gridlocked reservation. I was talking to Ms. Vogel, and her size of her reservation is, astronomical. And like it was stated in the record, there was 1,200 acres of land, on our reservation. And all these are opportunities to make sure we can acquire everything that we potentially can back and do it the right way. But we work well with all the municipalities, and I want to thank each and every one of you today.